Hey, this is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. This teaching will be addressing the specific 70 years addressed in Zechariah chapter 1. I want to start by acknowledging the probability that we may never truly understand the reference of these 70 years on this side of eternity. Many people lean to this thought because, well, if you can understand the time frame of these 70 years, then you may be able to narrow down the time of knowing the day of Yeshua's return. Now, since many hold to the phrase, "No man knows the day or the hour," they believe it's impossible to understand these 70 years. If you are one who leans to this thought, please hit pause on this teaching and read our brief article simply titled, Knowing the Day. We believe you'll find that phrase by Yeshua has been completely misunderstood. Now, that being said, whether we understand these 70 years is, well, yet to be seen. So, in this teaching, let's stay open to that possibility while considering some possible thoughts that may apply. Some ideas that may help us gain better understanding of Yeshua's return, whether they apply to the timing we're looking at in this teaching or some other year altogether in the future. This teaching is an extension from a previous teaching I did titled The Winter Timeline. While this teaching can stand alone in itself, I do believe it would be beneficial to watch that teaching before proceeding here. In that teaching, I mentioned how it appears that Yeshua could be standing with his bride on the 24th day of the 11th month, and the horses mentioned in the text could have just come back after the judgment, declaring the immediate calm after the storm. However, I want to offer another perspective that I believe bears some noteworthy weight to be considered. Now, I don't usually share thoughts that are attributed to specific dates. However, regardless of the timing presented, there could still be elements within this teaching that may spur deeper study or different thoughts we can all glean from in the future. When you get the opportunity, I encourage you to read Zechariah chapter 1, especially verses 7 through 12. And, as noted in the Winter Timeline teaching, most all translations that I have found mistranslate verse 12. They make it appear Yahweh is currently withholding mercy at that moment. However, the text implies it's a question of when he will withhold mercy, meaning mercy is being given at the moment, but it will come to an end. Also noted in that teaching, the 24th day of the 11th month mentioned here in verse 7 seems rather significant to me. But, as you'll see, I believe there's more to that imagery. The context gives the implication it was Yeshua standing with his bride, the myrtle trees. The myrtle trees being a picture or idiom to Esther. Thus, an image of Yeshua with his bride and the horses reporting the calm after the storm. When it comes to this text in Zechariah, in the previous teaching, I was assuming two things. One, the myrtle trees are representing all of the bride. And two, the horses reporting to Yeshua are coming back after it all started. However, what if this is a vision of Yeshua simply standing with those of his bride in heaven, those who come down with him, as Paul mentions in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 14. He says, "We believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him." So this vision of Yeshua with the myrtle trees could be the scene in heaven just before he returns. And the horses are simply reporting there is peace in the world right before all things began. Yeshua said all would be good as it was in the days of Noah. In other words, they're reporting everything is set to go. Everything is in place to start. This goes with what we see in the next chapter. Please consider Zechariah chapter 2. Come, come, flee from the land of the north, declares Yahweh. For I have scattered you to the four winds of heaven, declares Yahweh. Come, O Zion, escape, who live in the daughter of Babylon. This is extremely similar to what we see in Revelation. So it seems here in chapter 2 that he's calling his people out after that moment in chapter 1. It's after the 24th day of the 11th month. This leads me to believe it's possible the vision on the 24th day could have indeed been a vision of something taking place in heaven. The time just before he comes down with the believers who will be coming with him. It's the 70 years mentioned here in verse 12 that puts the timestamp in place, at least to our current understanding anyway. It appears at the time of the 24th day of the 11th month, the 70th year had not yet passed. So what are the 70 years mentioned here? Well, that's the question we need to consider. We need to be open to all the variables in things like this. Those we see and, well, those we may not see at the moment. I haven't heard much on the 70 years until the most recent times that surround the element of Israel becoming a nation. From UN Resolution 181 that took place on November 29, 1947, to May 14, 1948, when Israel declared their independence. Then, from the time Israel moved their government to Jerusalem in December of 1948, to the time they elected their first president on February 16, 1949. However, there's another element that may have been overlooked. The first government wasn't fully in place until March 10, 1949. This would be the day Israel officially had a completely functioning government. But it wasn't until they had their first cabinet established by the prime minister that the government could be fully functional. In fact, this is the very issue we see going on in Israel right now at the time of this recording. Israel had elections in April of 2019, but the prime minister was unable to form a governing coalition. It was the first failure of its kind in Israeli history. Let me say that again. It was the first failure of its kind in Israeli history. Then, May 30th, the Knesset voted to dissolve itself and trigger new elections. This also marked the first time the Knesset voted to dissolve itself before a government had been formed. Second elections were held in September of 2019 and ended with the same results. You know, it's as if the government for the 70th year was completely put on hold. Now, Israel plans to have their next election in early March. But again, it wasn't until March 10th of 1949 that Israel had their first cabinet and fully functioning government. So, if the 70 years are to apply to Israel in the light of the modern state of Israel, could this be something to consider as the start of the 70 years referenced in this verse? There are some who believe that the modern state of Israel really means nothing, that it was established by pagan rulers. But the same is true when Judah returned to the land in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. This shows that history does indeed repeat. There's nothing new under the sun. However, those in Ezra and Nehemiah's day pursued the Torah when they returned. They made Torah the law of the land. Those in the land today never made Torah the law of the land. That's the difference. Thus, Yahweh has been angry with Judah for these last 70 years as they have chosen rather to follow a man-made government instead. As mentioned before, it seems history has shown when you have Yahweh's people in Yahweh's land not following Yahweh's law, judgment is around the corner. Now some say, but Steve, there is no way this Israel is of Yahweh. They have pyramids and pagan symbols on their government buildings. But have you ever read what Israel had in the days of Josiah? They had pagan symbols and deities all over the temple. But that didn't mean they weren't God's people. It just meant they were walking in disobedience. Josiah saw this when the law was read to him. He knew Yahweh's anger was against them. And that's why I believe we see what we do in Zechariah regarding Yahweh's anger against Israel these 70 years. They have not made Torah the law of the land. History is cyclical, and because of that, I believe we can't completely dismiss these 70 years of Israel today. How it all applies, if it all applies, I don't know. But here's something to consider. The starting point of their government on March 10th of 1949 was the 10th day of the 12th month, according to the calendar we follow. So the 70 years would be officially up by the 10th day of the 12th month. Now, this doesn't mean judgment happens within this time. When it comes down to it, all we are given is that the 70 years were not up at the time the angel reported to Yeshua in the 11th month. While judgment could be plausible at the time of these 70 years, it doesn't declare it either. Now, while this text discusses the end of the 11th month, I want to show you a text that discusses judgment at the beginning of the 12th month. Ezekiel 32. Ezekiel 32 discusses the demise of the king of Egypt, spiritual Egypt. It's mentioned to be the 12th month. I discussed the spiritual Egypt in the teaching Signs in the Heavens. I believe this teaching to be an eye-opener as to who the spiritual Egypt really is in the end times. Ezekiel 32 discusses the first day of the 12th month, and it seems to be a warning of impending judgment to the king of Egypt. The text implies it's all over by the 15th day. This is also the time of Purim. Now, please notice how verse 7 is very similar to the day of the Lord. Verse 7, when I snuff you out, I will cover the heavens and darken their stars. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon will not give its light. It says the moon will not give its light. It's funny because every time I see phrases like this in the scriptures that describes the moon not giving its light, I keep going back and forth with the thought, is this a supernatural event, or is this giving us a clue to the timing of the event? You see, the sun is always shining for us. However, the moon goes through the cycle where it doesn't always give light. The conjunction, that moment when it doesn't give light, lasts only for a couple of minutes. However, to the naked eye, the moon isn't visible for up to 12 hours before or after that conjunction. So that's 24 hours, a full day, where the moon isn't visible to the naked eye. And that goes in line with what Yeshua said regarding his return. Mark 13:35. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, covering a full 24 hours. Even Yeshua's words here imply, though you may know the day, you won't know the hour of that day. Verses like this may be giving a hint to the day we should be watching for. And again, you really need to read our article, Knowing the Day, to see why this really could be something we should be open to. So the moon not giving its light could be a reference back to the event taking place on the first day of the month, at the time of the warning, the time of the new moon, the time when the moon does not give its light. This can actually point to a 7-day warning, as with Noah, the 24th day of the 11th month to the first day of the 12th month. 7 days. Yahweh gave the first announcement on the 24th day of the 9th month that he was going to shake everything again. Then, on the 24th day of the 11th month, we are given this vision of Yeshua standing ready to come down. Then, 7 days later, on the first day of the 12th month, we see destruction laid out in Ezekiel 32. So, in light of Zechariah chapter 2, seeming to imply judgment taking place after the 24th day of the 11th month, and Ezekiel 32, showing the 12th month as the time of judgment, I believe we need to be open to a few possible thoughts. And remember, as mentioned in the teaching, The Winter Timeline, ultimately, these can apply to any year. Now, that being, the first day of the 12th month seems very probable for us to be watching for Yeshua's return. The 10th day of the 12th month, the anniversary of Israel's government, is another day of interest. And, at the very least, it appears it all has to be completed by the 15th day of the 12th month. So, for me, I'll be watching on an annual basis the first day of the 12th month, the 10th day of the 12th month, and continuing through to the 15th day of the 12th month. Again, on an annual basis. So, see how this may apply to the calendar you follow. Or do like me and look at all the different calendars and watch them all together. Now, some say, but Steve, I don't get the importance of the 70 years. Most verses in the scriptures that reference it is discussing the captivity of Judah in Babylon. For many verses, that's correct. However, since we know history is cyclical, please consider what Jeremiah said. Jeremiah 25:12. But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation, the land of the Babylonians for their guilt, declares Yahweh, and will make it desolate forever. Verse 12 said Babylon would be desolate forever. Was physical Babylon made desolate forever after Judah left it in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah? Or is this speaking of the spiritual Babylon that Revelation says will be made desolate forever? Also, consider Jeremiah 29:10. This is what Yahweh says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place. Then verse 14. I will be found by you, declares Yahweh, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you. Verse 14 here is for the future and not discussing Judah's return to the land. Judah was not dispersed among multiple nations and places. They were banished to Babylon. This is a verse that seems to point to Yahweh bringing his people back from all the nations in the end times after the 70 years. It's the time when he brings both sticks of Israel back together again, reuniting Judah and dispersed Ephraim. His kingdom will no longer be divided. That which is also referenced in Deuteronomy chapter 30, Jeremiah chapter 31, Ezekiel chapter 11, and Ezekiel chapter 20. Whether the time is for the season we're in right now is yet to be seen. As always, we can only watch and pray. Now some could say, but Steve, what if the dates pass and nothing happens? Then as always, we continue to seek understanding on these kinds of things as we learn and grow in Him. There are tons of things in the Scriptures we don't fully comprehend. But that doesn't mean we just give up on trying to seek them out. Sometimes we may be led to put a topic on the shelf and pursue another subject, then pick it up later down the road. But even when we set certain topics to the side, it doesn't mean we just give up on it. Ultimately, it simply grants us more time to live our lives for Him and His glory. It gives us more time to let our light shine to those around us. That's the ultimate goal for our life. We're to shine His light to this world around us. May we never forget that. And if you're going through a time where you just want to go home, remember, even Paul was torn between wanting to go home and be with Yeshua or stay and help others in fruitful labor. So stay strong. Follow Him. He will give you the strength you need to make it through to the end. So whatever calendar you follow, whatever year we may be in, when it comes to the 11th and 12th months, keep watching and praying. These are things I believe we need to be open to and consider. I believe at the very least they seem plausible. Now, a few closing thoughts to remember. This is an extension of our teaching, the winter timeline. We believe it will be very beneficial to watch that teaching in conjunction with this one. Next, please understand that during the tribulation, the Antichrist will go after those who obey the commands of Yahweh and hold to the testimony of Yeshua. The two things that most rabbinical Jews hate. They deny Yeshua and detest the thought of anyone other than Jews following the Torah. Thus, they endorse the Noahide laws for all Gentiles. But remember, obedience is the fruit of our salvation, not the root of our salvation. Please visit our Faith Foundations page for more on that. Lastly, we need to understand the covenants. You are only setting yourself up for deception if you don't understand the covenants. Please see our teachings, the Eternal Covenant, and Before You Deny Him. These will help give understanding to the covenants. Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.